This is very Shivite. If a hot weather balloon isn't if a balloon isn't rising, maybe the weights are still tied to the ground. Let them go and the balloon flies without any effort. It doesn't require any effort, you see. And that's what I think is happening in terms of consciousness. One of the ways that they propagate this propaganda and consensus trance, I've talked about a lot, is through the word, what I've referred to as talismanic words and terms. And these are well known to politicians and preachers and people who have understood, like Professor Tolkien's character Saruman, the power of the word, the power of speech to control the mind. It's a very esoteric concept that ties into the gods Mercury and Hermes and so on. We don't have time to explore. But my God, have we not had that in recent times, you see. Certain words that are thrown up there. And the study of these particular words, looking at their esoteric meaning, what they might imply connotatively or to the unconscious mind even, is very important. In an article by Paul Levy online called Breaking Bush's Spell, he says that George Bush is a master hypnotist who skillfully puts people under his spell. Bush mesmerizes people by using simple, repetitive phrases. To quote Nazi propaganda chief Goebbels, propaganda must therefore always be essentially simple and repetitious. Keep repeating them in this simplified form despite the objections of the intellectuals. Bush's talking points, his buzzwords, are his incantations. These magic words act as opiates to the fearful masses. To quote ex-Harvard University president James Bryant Conant, some of mankind's most terrible misdeeds have been committed under the spell of certain magic words or phrases. This is again the power of the word. And how do we make a word? We spell it. And to emphasize that point,
the world judged the Iraqi regime was a dangerous aggressor. In the interests of world peace and regional security, the community of nations required Iraq to surrender its offensive arsenal, its chemical and biological weapons, and abandon its nuclear weapons program. Iraq agreed to comply.
The world judged the Iraqi regime to be a dangerous aggressor. In the interests of world peace and regional security, the community of nations expelled Iraq from Kuwait, required Iraq to surrender its offensive arsenal, its chemical biological weapons, and to abandon its nuclear weapons program. Iraq agreed to comply. Iraq's continued defiance of the community of nations presents a challenge which must be addressed.
Presents a challenge which must be addressed. It is inherently dangerous
to allow a country such as
Iraq to retain weapons of mass destruction, particularly in the light of its past aggressive behaviour.
That's right. If the world community fails to disarm Iraq, we fear that other rogue states will be encouraged to believe that they too can have these weapons, these most deadly of weapons, to systematically defy international resolutions, and that the world will do nothing to stop them.
That is the ultimate nightmare, Mr. Speaker, which the world must take decisive and effective steps to prevent. Possession of chemical, biological or nuclear weapons by terrorists would constitute a direct, undeniable and lethal threat including to Canada Australia and its people. The world has tried for years other means, but so far to no avail. We cannot walk away from the threat that Iraq's continued possession of weapons of mass destruction constitutes to its region and to the wider world. In the final analysis, Mr. Speaker, the absolute conviction of the government is that disarming Iraq is necessary for the long-term security of the world and is therefore manifestly in the national interest of Australia.
In the final analysis, disarming Iraq is necessary for the long-term security of the world, to the collective interests of our historic allies, and therefore manifestly, Mr. Speaker, it is in the national interest of this country.
And so on and so forth. President of Canada, President of Australia. No ostensible connections, and exactly the same script, practically word for word. We have many other examples of this. No conspiracy. Nobody higher up. It's all coming from their minds and their brains. You remember John Dean's statement about how Bush's attitude in the White House when they're sitting there? Like he's just sitting there officiating over some sort of macabre play? How much do we know about these words? Do we know that government is actually from gubernare, and mente is mental, the governance of the mind? Do we know, for instance, that the word to entertain, what it really means? For instance, that in Norwegian, actually, it means to be held under, to hold, to be held down. Entertain in Norwegian means to be held under, just like to be amused or amazed means to be confused, to distract. Yep. We know that the religious world is full of this type of talismanic wordsmithery, you see. Take a word that's used so ubiquitously, like spirit. What does the word really mean? Little more, actually, than breath. That's what it really means. But look at the loadedness of that word. Look what it's come to mean in the mind of people. When we look at this word, for instance, enlightenment, I would say that almost 100% of the people here, or anyone watching this, has a very clear understanding in their mind of what this means. And they're envisioning light, like luminescence. But in fact, has anyone thought that it also could mean lightness, as in weight? Very few. And yet, perhaps if we think about the word enlightenment and think, does it really mean, is it really connected to light and luminescence? What is light? Can light not conceal as much as it reveals? If you look at the first card of the tarot, the Fool, if you look at what the Taoists were saying, could it be that enlightenment is really a sense of lightness in a sense of weight? But the thing is, you see, that we're, by this abnegation, by this avoidance, like Patrick McGowan said, everybody votes for a dictator. Now, you might say, yes, but I don't vote for your dictator. I prefer this guy. You prefer that guy. But at the end of the day, does it really matter what the stereotype is? We come back to this idea that it's going to be a profoundly attitudinal sense of freedom that basically is the beginning of this differentiation, individuation, selfhood process. Which is why then you can understand why it's not going to happen for everybody. Because that's the criteria. You already have to have that that sense of attitudinal independence. And one might even argue that you either have it or you don't. Maybe it cannot be instilled in someone who doesn't already have it. What we do know is that it's being uninstilled. We know that it's being suppressed deeply. And the experts who know, who have the evidence, they know this, that this is happening every day. And so when we get to grips with that dynamic, there's a deeper sense of responsibility involved, because might we not also be doing that to other people? William Blake said, the fist that crushes the tyrant's head becomes a tyrant in its stead. We might be pointing at that tyranny over the hill or in the other valley, but we must observe our own relationships in life, and even, most importantly, our relationship with our own selves. How do we relate to our own selves? I went into this in other talks about the self-sadism that's implicit in our attitudes about ourselves, tying back into what Heidegger and even Hegel are talking about, the social persona. If everything that we know about ourselves, everything, is based on the approval rating of other people, and also the fact that we don't get the approval we require, what a mess. And then if everyone's doing that likewise, what a mess. It's the collective mirror then that becomes the prime datum for us, not individuality at all. Except when it's the chic individuality that is presented, the faux version, the bogus version, by the media apparatus that have to give you now the simulacra of it in order to keep you pacified. And we'll be looking at that later on. I was walking around Bath 2 weeks ago when we were doing the talk there, and I came across this unbelievable sign